Bernard Mostert is the co-founder and former chief executive of Tekkie Town, which was pulled into the whole Steinhoff debacle when their company was sold, or when the company was sold to Steinhoff just before the implosion of that business. Today has been a very big day in the life of Steinhoff shareholders, but more particularly in the life of the vendors. And Bernard, you've been incredibly instrumental in making this happen. You wanted the liquidation of Steinhoff, as you've told us at various occasions over the past few months. Before we go into what the court found, just tell us why you wanted Steinhoff to be liquidated.
Yeah, Alec, and I think it's important to recognize that we don't have a liquidation order yet. I mean, effectively, the ruling by Justice Slingers allows us to proceed with our liquidation application. Last week, we spent 3 fairly exhausting days in court, and we heard on 3 matters. The first was the attempted entry of the financial creditors, the people who bought the distressed debt after the revelation of the fraud. They wanted to join and oppose the liquidation bid. Um, their application to join was dismissed with costs. Then there was an application from the 2 Dutch administrators who also wanted to join in opposition to the liquidation bid, and their attempt to join was also dismissed with cost. And then finally, there was quite a long and intense debate as to whether South Africa would have the jurisdiction to um, liquidate an external company. Now it's easy to assume that it's logical that Steinhoff was a South African entity that went offshore. Most of the fraud occurred in the entity before it went to the Netherlands. Um, and as a result, there was a big debate as to whether South African courts, and specifically the Western Cape High Court, would have the right to proceed in hearing as to whether the company can be liquidated. And that point was also ruled in our favor, again with costs. So on Thursday, the show gets on the road, so to speak, when ourselves and Jan Lamprecht, another party that is intervening in support of the liquidation, gets to be heard in the Western Cape High Court. And at this stage, it will run from this coming Thursday until the 20th of September over various dates, not continuous.
You mentioned with costs. For those who don't understand the legal process, that's like losing a tennis match, love six.
Um, yeah, I don't know how to, listen, in the last 4 years, I've become a lot more adept to litigation. Um, I'm grateful that the cost order went in our favor. These processes aren't cheap, and we have obviously been fighting a long and hard fight for something that seems to be fairly logical. I think quite a lot of people have accepted that we were defrauded. Still a few people that oppose it, but just the amount of money that we've had to spend in order to be heard and be in a court is significant. So the cost orders from that perspective do help.
So in other words, included in those who didn't want you to proceed with the liquidation of Steinhoff were the financial creditors. Now, we have spoken about this in the past, but please recap that for us. How did the financial creditors get involved, and who are they?
Yeah, well, the who are they is a part of what was a big debate last week, because the argument was that they were not properly identified. But to take you to the beginning, um, so Steinhoff goes along merrily um, from 2008 or 2009. It has various lenders that provides finance to the company, very much like how you and I would apply for a bond if we needed one, or for a form of finance, or business, a general banking facility in our businesses. And then Steinhoff fails to publish its financial results. Marcus Jooste resigns. The company announces that there were accounting irregularities and that they will be launching a forensic investigation. At that time, most of arguably all of the creditors who had instruments in which Steinhoff owed their money sold those instruments at discounts. The Central Bank of Europe was one held some of the Steinhoff bonds, and they sold them at a discount. And these were bought um, predominantly by hedge funds. And hedge funds who specialize in distressed debt opportunities. So it's not the typical person from whom you would get a bond, or a general banking facility. And they then struck a deal with Steinhoff's management in which effectively, seemingly, they said, we hold this debt, we need to restructure it. The debt was euro denominated. And in order to make you keep going and not to bring actions against you, we want a new interest rate, 10%, which is astronomical for Europe. And we want to be paid 100 cents on what the original debt was, regardless of whether we bought it for 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents. We want to get 10% interest and we want to get the full amount. So, and then you have a situation where they come and they say, we are supposedly the single biggest creditor. We won't be compromised in this process. As a matter of fact, this process will be exceptionally profitable for us. But yet we want to vote that others are compromised. Ourselves, Christo Visser, the many shareholders that had money with Alan Gray, and the institutional investors, etc., all compromised. Essentially prejudiced at the hands of these financial creditors. Steinhoff's debt today, one hand still needs to be realized, and all the people like ourselves, Dr. Visser, etc., who put money into Steinhoff by way of putting their businesses and their life work into it, and for something that wasn't so.
Mm-hmm. So these are, well, I suppose some people call them vulture funds in a less flattering perspective, but they've now been shown the door. What happens next? You've got the Steinhoff share price, which has been bouncing all over the place. If you are successful in having the company liquidated, what happens to those people who own Steinhoff shares?
Alec, to be perfectly honest, I don't know. I do know that the vast majority of Steinhoff shareholders seemingly are people who dabbled and invested in the share post the revelations of the fraud. And I guess to some degree, you have to accept that that was a risk that those people took, because it's hopefully at some point we will get past the point where somebody says there wasn't fraud. It was just 106 billion rand accounting oopsie, and the like, So it's very difficult for me to comment on what will happen to the Steinhoff share price, because I think Steinhoff, immediately after the revelations, one or two analysts referred to Steinhoff as uninvestable, which is an interesting term. It's usually buy, sell, or hold. And all of a sudden we saw this fourth term called uninvestable. So it is, I think quite a lot of people hope that the settlement would go through. Some of them maybe because they don't want to see the inside of a courtroom, others because they stood to make a large profit. But our goal has always been pretty clear. We're not afraid to see the inside of a courtroom. We pursue what we believe is right. And the reality is that even on the company's own admission, there was a significant fraud. So you need to split the fraud and the proceeds of the fraud from one another. And really what we're talking about now is the proceeds of the fraud.
And the end game for you is to get your business back.
Yeah. The end game for us is to cancel the contract that we were induced into. And cancelling that contract would restore our controlling interest in our business to us.
I'm not a lawyer. I did do Com Law 1, and I remember from those days that there was something called misrepresentation, which was a very strong argument in cancelling a contract. Is that what you're going for? That you were misrepresented by Steinhoff, and as a result of that, the contract to sell the business, or that you sold the business to them, is null and void?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And we just take it one step further. We said that there was fraudulent misrepresentation.
So it all starts on Thursday and goes on until mid-September. When are you likely to have a judgment on this? And indeed, once that comes out, were it to go in your favor, what happens then?
Well, what would happen if we are successful ultimately is that Steinhoff would be put in the hands of curators, liquidators appointed by the master of the High Court. And I think what's interesting then is we can really get into what exactly transpired. We can have a Section 417 inquiry, we can have witnesses called, and South Africa can see exactly what happened behind the scenes to cause this huge stain on our corporate reputation. So that is effectively a successful liquidation bid would remove the control of Steinhoff from the existing management and board and put it in the hands of people who are mandated to treat all creditors fairly, and B, who are mandated to investigate exactly what went wrong. And I think we would all welcome that.
Any progress on the investigation that has been done by PwC? That I know that you've been asking for it. People like Marcus Jooste has been asking for it as well. Yet PwC and the existing managers of Steinhoff have been resisting disclosing that. Any progress or update on the release of that?
To answer your question in short, no progress in terms of actually having it been released. But Jan Lamprecht, in his papers supporting the liquidation bid, did make reference to the fact that Steinhoff quite often relies on the contents of the PwC report, and he's now brought a process in which he asked that Steinhoff delivers the PwC report as part of the documentation that is required in terms of the action that we're currently going through. So that will be interesting to see if this is the way in which the PwC report comes out into the open. And again, I think people will be very interested to see who did what, how did they do it, and what led to this, massive fraud.
It's an extraordinary story and one that has got still a little while to run. But from what happened with the judgment that was released today, it appears as though your whole strategy is very much on track. Is there anything that could derail it from here?
Alec, listen, we've seen so many stratagems and outcomes that has been effectively, in our view, delay tactics. So you never know what people come up with. When the original fraud was contemplated or discussed in Discovery, Steinhoff came out and they said they will leave no stone unturned to make sure that there's prosecution and that all the wrongs are righted. But that didn't turn out to be true. So it's difficult to make a comment along those lines in terms of what will happen. We continue to fight for what we believe is right. We know we're not wrong, and we trust the system.
Brilliant.